He asked, "Is she single?" A Hell's Angel said, "She's mine," before realizing it. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the small-town gas station as Marlene Brooks eased her silver sedan into an empty spot near the pumps. Her hands gripped the steering wheel for a moment longer than necessary, her wedding ring catching the light. Even after 2 years, she still wore it, a habit she couldn't seem to break. The station looked like something from another era, with its weathered wooden signs and old-fashioned pumps. A bell chimed somewhere inside the convenience store as another customer pushed through the door. The peaceful atmosphere of the place made Marlene's shoulders relax slightly. She stepped out of her car, her sensible shoes crunching on the gravel. The air smelled of pine trees and distant rain, a welcome change from the city she'd left behind that morning. This solo road trip was supposed to help clear her mind, give her space to think about what came next in her life. The widow support group had suggested it, said it might help her find herself again. Marlene smoothed down her navy blouse, tucking a strand of silver-streaked hair behind her ear. She'd always taken pride in her appearance, even if these days she dressed more for comfort than style. The gas station was quiet except for the gentle whir of the pumps and the distant sound of birds. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. "Just need to fill up and keep moving," she murmured to herself, a habit she'd developed since living alone. She reached for the gas pump, her movements careful and deliberate. A motorcycle rumbled into the station, the sound breaking through the afternoon quiet. Marlene tried not to stare, as a large man dismounted, his leather vest covered in patches she didn't want to examine too closely. Tattoos covered his arms, disappearing beneath his shirt sleeves, and his thick beard was peppered with gray. Her heart rate picked up as he approached the pump next to hers. She kept her eyes down, focusing on the numbers ticking up on the display. But she could feel his presence, solid and impossible to ignore, just a few feet away. The sound of footsteps made her glance up. A younger man had wandered over, his eyes moving between Marlene and the intimidating biker. Something in his gaze made her uncomfortable, that familiar feeling of being sized up, evaluated. "Hey," the stranger called out, addressing the biker. "That lady with you? She single?" Before Marlene could process what was happening, the tattooed man, who she would later know as Rock, moved with surprising speed. He stepped into her space, his presence overwhelming but somehow not threatening. His eyes met hers for just a second, and she saw something unexpected there, a flicker of protectiveness, maybe even gentleness. "She's mine," he declared, his voice deep and gravelly. Then his hands were cupping her face, and his lips were on hers. The kiss was nothing like she expected, not rough or demanding, but warm and almost tender. Time seemed to stop as the scent of leather and something distinctly masculine filled her senses. She was too shocked to move, her hands frozen at her sides, the gas pump forgotten in her grip. When he pulled back, Marlene could only stare, her heart thundering in her chest. She was aware of the small crowd that had gathered, the teenage clerk who'd stepped outside to watch, an elderly couple by their RV, the stranger who'd asked about her relationship status. They all stood there, as stunned as she was by this unexpected display. Her lips tingled where his beard had brushed against them, and her mind raced with questions she couldn't voice. Who was this man? Why had he kissed her? And why, despite her confusion and embarrassment, did some small part of her want him to do it again? The spell of the unexpected kiss broke as Marlene's shock transformed into anger. Her cheeks flushed red, but not from embarrassment anymore. She stepped back, creating distance between herself and the imposing biker. "What do you think you're doing?" Her voice trembled with fury. She jabbed a finger toward his chest, not quite touching him but making her point clear. You can't just grab people and kiss them like that. Rock's confident demeanor faltered for a moment. He blinked, clearly not expecting such a fierce reaction from the seemingly quiet woman. The small crowd that had gathered began to disperse, sensing the shift in mood. "Look, lady," he started, running a hand through his beard. "That guy was—" "I don't care what that guy was doing," Marlene cut him off. Her hands shook as she replaced the gas pump. "I'm not some piece of property for you to claim. I'm not yours or anyone else's." Rock held up his hands in a peaceful gesture, but his size made even that look intimidating. "You've got it all wrong. I was trying to help." "Help?" Marlene let out a bitter laugh. "I don't need help from someone like you, especially not the kind that involves—" She touched her lips briefly, then quickly dropped her hand, angry at herself for the gesture. "Someone like me?" Rock's voice grew quieter, but there was an edge to it now. "And what exactly am I like?" Marlene gestured at his leather vest with its patches, his tattoos, his whole intimidating presence. "Look at yourself. You're scary. You're rough. You're exactly the kind of man my mother warned me about, and I'm not interested in whatever this is supposed to be." Rock's expression shifted, something vulnerable flickering across his features before disappearing behind a mask of indifference. "I saw the way that guy was looking at you. Trust me, you didn't want his kind of attention. I was trying to protect you." "Protect me?" Marlene grabbed her purse from her car. "I've been taking care of myself for a long time. I don't need protection, especially not from a stranger who thinks it's okay to kiss women without their permission." "That's not what I—" Rock ran a hand over his face in frustration. "Listen, I didn't mean to offend you. Maybe I didn't handle it the best way, but my intentions were good." "Your intentions?" Marlene shook her head. "Save them for someone else. I'm not interested in your intentions, your protection, or anything else you have to offer." She turned on her heel and strode toward the convenience store, her back straight and her head held high. Her heart was still racing, but now it was from anger rather than surprise. The bell chimed as she yanked the door open, not looking back. Rock stood by the pumps, watching her go. His usual confidence had deserted him, replaced by a mixture of confusion and something else. Admiration, maybe. Most people cowered when he showed up, but this woman had stood her ground. She'd yelled at him, pointed her finger in his face, and walked away like she hadn't just told off a Hell's Angel. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth as he watched her through the store window. There was something about her fire, her independence, that caught his attention in a way he hadn't expected. But she'd made herself clear. She wanted nothing to do with him. The bell above the diner's door chimed as Marlene stepped inside. The smell of coffee and bacon wrapped around her like a warm blanket, but her comfort vanished the moment she spotted him. There, in the back corner, sat Rock. His massive frame seemed too big for the small booth, his leather vest standing out against the cheerful yellow cushions. Marlene's steps faltered. She considered turning around and finding somewhere else to eat, but her stomach growled in protest. She hadn't eaten since breakfast, and this was the only diner for miles. "Just one?" A waitress appeared, menus in hand, her name tag reading, Betty. "Yes," Marlene replied, her voice tight. "Somewhere far from—" "Oh, that corner's perfect!" Betty gestured to a booth just 2 tables away from Rock. "The lighting's best over there." Before Marlene could object, Betty was already walking toward the spot, menus clutched to her chest. With a resigned sigh, Marlene followed. She could feel Rock's eyes on her as she slid into the booth, but she kept her gaze fixed firmly on the menu. "Coffee?" Betty asked, already pouring a cup. "Thank you," Marlene murmured, though her throat felt too dry to drink anything. The menu trembled slightly in her hands. She tried to focus on the list of sandwiches, but the words blurred together. The kiss from earlier still lingered in her memory, not the anger that followed, but the moment itself. It had been so long since anyone had kissed her like that, with such... She shook her head, banishing the thought. Minutes crawled by. Marlene ordered a turkey club, more to have something to do than from actual hunger. She could hear Rock's coffee cup clicking against its saucer, the sound impossibly loud in the quiet diner. The scrape of his chair made her jump. Heavy boots approached her table, and a shadow fell across her placemat. Marlene's hands clenched around her water glass. "Ma'am?" Rock's voice was softer than she expected. "I'd like to apologize." Marlene looked up, surprised to see uncertainty in his expression. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, looking more like a schoolboy called to the principal's office than an intimidating biker. "What I did at the gas station," he continued, "it wasn't right. I shouldn't have kissed you without permission. I thought I was helping, but..." He ran a hand through his beard. "Well, I was wrong." The apology caught her off guard. She'd expected more posturing, more of the tough guy act. Instead, he seemed genuine, almost vulnerable. "I accept your apology," Marlene said carefully. "But that doesn't make us friends." Rock nodded, relief visible in his shoulders. "I understand. I couldn't let it sit wrong between us. Not in a small town like this." Something in his tone made Marlene look at him more closely. Behind the tattoos and the gruff exterior, she caught a glimpse of something else, a kind of lonely understanding that echoed her own. It unsettled her how familiar it felt. "Thank you for apologizing," she said, her voice softer now. "But I meant what I said. I'm not looking for whatever this might be." "Fair enough," Rock replied, but he lingered for a moment longer than necessary before returning to his seat. Marlene watched him go, aware of an odd tension in her chest. She didn't want to be attracted to this man. She didn't want to feel this pull toward someone so different from everything she knew. But as she sat there, picking at her sandwich, she couldn't deny that something about him called to her, like a familiar song in a foreign language. Over the next few days, the small town started to feel familiar to Marlene. She found herself settling into a routine. Breakfast at the diner, a walk through the quiet streets, and occasional stops at the gas station for coffee. And everywhere she went, she seemed to cross paths with Rock. At first, their encounters were nothing more than polite nods. A quiet morning here, a brief smile there. She'd catch glimpses of him through the diner window, his motorcycle parked outside, or spot him filling up his bike at the gas station. Each time, her heart would do a little jump she couldn't quite explain. On the fourth morning, as Marlene sat at her usual corner table with her crossword puzzle, heavy footsteps approached. She looked up to find Rock standing there, 2 cups of coffee in his massive hands. "Mind if I join you?" His voice was gruff but gentle. Marlene hesitated, then gestured to the empty seat across from her. "I suppose not." Rock set one of the coffees in front of her, black, just how she liked it. She raised an eyebrow, surprised he'd noticed. "I'm Rock," he said, settling into the booth. "Figure it's about time we had a proper introduction." "Marlene Brooks," she replied, folding her newspaper neatly. "Though I suppose you already knew that from..." She trailed off, not wanting to mention the kiss. "From Betty," he finished, nodding towards the waitress. "She talks about you. Says you're staying at the Pine Grove Motel?" "For now." Marlene wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup. "I needed some time away from home. To think." Rock nodded, understanding in his eyes. Sometimes distance helps clear the head." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the morning sun streaming through the window, casting warm patterns on the Formica table between them. "I was in the Marines," Rock said suddenly, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. "2 tours in Afghanistan. Been out for 15 years now, but sometimes—" He shook his head. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday." Marlene watched his face, noting the way his eyes seemed to look somewhere far away. "That must have been difficult." "The being there was tough, yeah. But the coming home—" He cleared his throat. "That was harder. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt right anymore. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't settle. Ended up joining the Angels because at least there, everyone understood what it meant to be a little broken." His honesty caught her off guard. She found herself sharing before she could think better of it. "My husband passed away 2 years ago. 43 years we were married." Her voice softened. "Sometimes I still turn to tell him something, and then the empty space hits you all over again," Rock finished quietly. Marlene nodded, surprised by the tears that pricked at her eyes. "The support groups help, but they don't really understand. They talk about moving on and finding yourself, but how do you move on from half your life?" "You don't," Rock said simply. "You just learn to carry it differently." Their eyes met across the table, and Marlene saw in his gaze the same weight she carried. Different causes, same pain. For a moment her walls wavered, but she caught herself, straightening her spine. "Well," she said, reaching for her crossword again, "I suppose we all have our burdens to bear." Rock seemed to sense her retreat and didn't push. He sipped his coffee, respecting the boundary she'd drawn, even as something unspoken hung in the air between them. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the park's winding paths as Marlene walked beside Rock. His tall frame moved with surprising grace for such a large man, and he'd slowed his usual stride to match her pace. The park was quiet, except for the distant laughter of children at the playground and the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. "Some days are harder than others," Marlene said, breaking their comfortable silence. "Like when I make too much coffee in the morning, forgetting I'm only brewing for one now." She wrapped her light cardigan tighter around herself, though the air wasn't cold. Rock nodded, his eyes focused on the path ahead. The sunlight caught the silver streaks in his beard, and Marlene noticed the way his jaw tightened at her words. "Or when something funny happens," she continued, "and I turn to share it, but—" She took a deep breath. "It's the little things that catch you off guard, isn't it? The empty chair at the dinner table, the unused pillow on the bed." Rock listened intently, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something softer, more contemplative. His silence encouraged her to keep talking, filling the space between them with words she hadn't shared with anyone else. "The support group tells me I need to create a new normal," she said, making air quotes with her fingers. "But how do you create normal when everything feels so wrong? When you've spent 43 years building a life with someone and suddenly they're gone?" They passed an old oak tree, its branches spreading wide above them. A squirrel darted across their path, disappearing into the underbrush. "Some nights," Marlene admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, "I still reach for him in my sleep. And when my hand finds empty space, it's like losing him all over again." Rock's footsteps slowed as they approached a small creek. The water burbled softly over smooth stones, creating a peaceful backdrop to their conversation. He guided them to a wooden bench overlooking the water. As they sat down, Marlene noticed the sadness in Rock's eyes. Not pity, but something deeper, more personal. His massive hands rested on his knees, and she could see the tension in his shoulders. "You know," he said finally, his voice rougher than usual, Since coming back from the service, I've kept everyone at arm's length." He paused, watching the water flow past. "Figured it was safer that way. For them, and for me." Marlene waited, sensing there was more he needed to say. "Lost too many friends over there," he continued. "And when I came back, everything was different. I was different." His fingers absently traced one of the tattoos on his arm. "Been afraid to let anyone get close since then. Easier to be the tough guy everyone expects than to risk—" He trailed off, struggling to find the words. "Risk being vulnerable again?" Marlene finished softly. Rock nodded, meeting her eyes. "Yeah, but there's something about you, Marlene. Something that makes me want to try. And that scares the hell out of me." Marlene's heart fluttered unexpectedly. "I know what you mean," she admitted. "The thought of opening up again, of letting someone in, it terrifies me." She watched a leaf float down the creek. "I'm not sure I remember how anymore." They sat in silence for a moment, the creek's gentle song filling the space between them. Both understood they'd crossed some invisible line, shared something precious and fragile, but neither knew quite what to do with it. Finally, Marlene stood, smoothing her skirt. "I should head back," she said softly. Rock rose too, his expression uncertain but gentle. They walked back toward the park entrance, each lost, in their own thoughts, each wondering about the unexpected connection they'd found in their shared fear of connection. The fluorescent lights of the community center's meeting room cast harsh shadows across the circle of chairs. Marlene sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, as other widows shared their stories. Usually she found comfort in these weekly meetings, but tonight her mind kept drifting to the afternoon's conversation with Rock by the creek. Sarah, a younger widow with kind eyes, was talking about her husband's favorite coffee mug that she couldn't bring herself to pack away. Normally, Marlene would nod in understanding, maybe share her own story about John's old cardigan that still hung in their closet back home. Instead, she found herself thinking about the way Rock's voice had softened when he spoke about his time in the service, how his tough exterior had cracked just enough to let her see the pain underneath. "Marlene?" Monica, the group facilitator, called gently. "Would you like to share tonight?" Marlene blinked, realizing everyone was looking at her. "I'm sorry," she said, straightening in her chair. "I'm just distracted tonight." "That's perfectly normal," Monica assured her. "Grief isn't linear. Some days are harder than others." But it wasn't grief weighing on her mind tonight. It was the unexpected flutter in her chest when Rock had looked at her, the way his vulnerability had touched something deep inside her that she thought had died with John. After the meeting, Marlene drove back to her motel in a daze. The neon vacancy sign cast a red glow across the parking lot as she parked her car. Inside her room, she sat on the edge of the bed, the same thoughts circling in her mind like leaves caught in a whirlwind. What was she doing? She was too old for this kind of confusion, these butterflies in her stomach. Rock was nothing like John, rough where John had been gentle, imposing where John had been approachable. And yet, a knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. Through the peephole, she saw Rock standing there, his massive frame filling the doorway. Her heart jumped to her throat. After a moment's hesitation, she opened the door. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," Rock said, his voice unusually quiet. He looked different in the soft light, less intimidating, more human. "No, I was just—" Marlene gestured vaguely. "Would you like to come in?" Rock ducked his head to enter the room, and Marlene suddenly felt self-conscious about the modest motel furniture and her simple appearance. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted, settling into the room's only chair while Marlene perched on the bed. "Keep thinking about our talk this afternoon." "Me too," Marlene said softly. "I could barely focus at my support group meeting." "Support group?" "For widows," she explained. "We meet every week, share stories, support each other through the rough patches." Rock nodded, his fingers absently tracing the tattoos on his forearm. "After I came back from deployment, they wanted me to join something similar, veterans support group. I never went. Thought I could handle it on my own." "And could you?" "No," he said simply. "Just got real good at pretending I could." Marlene found herself leaning forward, drawn in by his honesty. "What changed?" "Meeting you," Rock said, his eyes meeting hers. "There's something about you that makes me want to stop pretending. Makes me want to be real." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Marlene felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. "I know what you mean," she whispered. "When I'm with you, I feel things I thought I'd never feel again. And it scares me." The morning sun cast long shadows across the motel parking lot as Marlene stepped out of her room. Rock was waiting by his motorcycle, looking almost nervous, an expression that seemed out of place on his weathered face. He'd traded his usual leather vest for a simple black t-shirt that did little to hide his tattoos. "Morning," he said, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "I was thinking, there's this festival in town today. Nothing fancy, just some local stuff. Games, food, that kind of thing." Marlene wrapped her light cardigan tighter around herself, studying him. After last night's conversation, something had shifted between them. The wall she'd built around her heart had developed a tiny crack. "A festival?" she asked, trying to picture this imposing man among cotton candy and carnival games. "Yeah." Rock ran a hand through his beard. "Thought it might be nice, no pressure or anything. Just lighter than our usual talks." His vulnerability in that moment touched something in Marlene. "That sounds lovely," she found herself saying. They walked the few blocks to the town square together, close but not touching. The festival was small but charming. Colorful booths lined the streets, the air filled with the smell of popcorn and the sound of children laughing. "Want some cotton candy?" Rock asked, gesturing to a nearby vendor. Marlene couldn't help but smile. "I haven't had cotton candy in years." They shared the fluffy pink treat, and Marlene couldn't stop herself from laughing when some of it got caught in Rock's beard. He joined in, his deep chuckle warming something inside her. At the ring toss booth, Rock's military training showed through. He won her a small stuffed bear, presenting it with an almost shy smile. "Not much of a prize," he admitted. "It's perfect," Marlene said, tucking it into her purse. As they walked past the various booths, Rock told her stories about his time in the service, the lighter ones about friendship and camaraderie rather than combat. Marlene shared memories of teaching her grandchildren to bake cookies, of the family picnics she used to host. They were standing by a food truck, sharing a plate of funnel cake, when a slightly intoxicated man stumbled too, close to Marlene. Before she could react, Rock was there, his body positioning itself between her and the stranger. He didn't say anything, didn't make any aggressive moves. He simply stood there, solid and protective, until the man mumbled an apology and moved away. "Sorry," Rock said afterward, looking embarrassed. Force of habit. But Marlene wasn't upset. Instead, she felt a warmth spread through her chest. It had been a long time since anyone had wanted to protect her. John had been like that too, not controlling, just caring. "Thank you," she said softly, touching his arm. The muscle beneath her fingers was tense, but it relaxed at her touch. Rock looked down at her, his eyes soft despite his gruff appearance. Around them, the festival continued, children running past with balloons, music playing from a nearby stage, the smell of barbecue in the air. But in that moment, Marlene only saw him, this complicated man who was slowly but surely working his way past her defenses. She realized, with a mixture of surprise and pleasure, that she was actually enjoying herself. More than that, she was enjoying being with him. The small cafe on Main Street buzzed with the gentle hum of afternoon conversation. Marlene sat across from Rock at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of chamomile tea. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, catching the silver in Rock's beard and the gentle smile that now came more easily to his face. "You know," Marlene said, stirring her tea absently, "I never thought I'd be here, having coffee with someone new." She paused, watching the leaves swirl in her cup. "After John passed, I just couldn't imagine." Rock nodded, understanding in his dark eyes. Life has a way of surprising us. His large hands dwarfed his coffee mug, but there was a gentleness in how he held it. "My last relationship was years ago. Sarah, her name was. She couldn't handle the nightmares, the way I'd wake up sometimes." "From the war?" Marlene asked softly. "Yeah." Rock's voice grew quiet. "You spent so much time learning to be tough, to survive. Then you come home and realize you don't know how to be soft anymore." Marlene reached across the table, briefly touching his hand. "John was like that too, in some ways. He served in Vietnam. It took him years to talk about it." "Your husband sounds like he was a good man." "He was." Marlene smiled, remembering. "We had 42 years together, built a whole life. When he died, I thought that part of my life was over." She looked up at Rock. "I never expected to feel..." "To feel what?" Rock's voice was gentle, encouraging. "To feel anything again. For anyone." The words came out barely above a whisper. Rock took a slow sip of his coffee. "I've done things I'm not proud of, Marlene. The military, the club. But sitting here with you makes me want to be better." The honesty in his voice touched something deep inside her. Marlene studied him. This man who looked so dangerous but spoke so tenderly. His tattoos told stories of a hard life, but his eyes held a warmth that made her feel safe. "Yesterday at the festival," she said, "I had fun. Real fun. I can't remember the last time I laughed like that." "Me neither." Rock smiled, and the expression transformed his whole face. "You make me forget about all the rough stuff, just for a while." They talked for hours, sharing stories about their lives. Rock told her about his childhood dreams of becoming a mechanic, before the military changed his path. Marlene shared memories of raising her children, of the small moments that made up a life well lived. The afternoon light was growing soft when they finally stood to leave. Rock held the cafe door open for her, and they stepped out into the cool evening air. The street was quiet, with just a few people walking past the storefronts. Rock turned to face her, hesitation written across his features. Slowly, carefully, he leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss to her cheek. His beard was softer than she expected, and warmth bloomed in her chest at the tender gesture. But the warmth brought fear with it. Marlene stepped back, her hand flying to her cheek where his lips had been. I should go," she said, even as part of her wanted to stay. Rock nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Take care, Marlene," he said softly, watching as she turned and walked away, her heart beating a little faster than usual. The Italian restaurant's warm lighting cast a soft glow over their corner table. Marlene watched as Rock carefully twirled spaghetti around his fork, his large hands somehow managing the delicate task with surprising grace. The sight made her smile, this intimidating man with his leather vest and tattoos, taking such care with his pasta. "What?" Rock asked, catching her expression. "Nothing," Marlene chuckled. "I just never thought I'd be having dinner with a Hell's Angel who knows how to properly eat spaghetti." Rock's deep laugh filled their corner of the restaurant. "There's a lot you might not expect about me." His eyes twinkled. "I can also bake a mean apple pie." "Now that I have to see to believe," Marlene said, taking a sip of her wine. The evening flowed easily, their conversation moving from childhood memories to favorite books. Rock told her about his first motorcycle, a beat-up Harley he'd restored himself. Marlene shared stories about her grandchildren, her face lighting up as she described their latest adventures. "You're different when you talk about them," Rock observed. "Your whole face changes." Marlene felt her cheeks warm. "They're my joy. After John passed, they were what kept me going." After dinner, they stepped out into the cool evening air. The river path beckoned, lit by old-fashioned lampposts that cast pools of golden light on the water. "Want to walk for a bit?" Rock asked, gesturing toward the path. Marlene nodded, falling into step beside him. The river flowed quietly beside them, its gentle sound creating a peaceful backdrop for their conversation. "I've been thinking," Rock said after a while, his voice lower than usual, "about why I joined the Angels after leaving the service." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "In the military, everything was intense. Life, death, brotherhood. When I came back, civilian life felt empty. The club filled that void." Marlene listened, noting the pain in his voice. "But the things I saw over there..." Rock's hands clenched at his sides. "They change you, make you hard, make you afraid." He stopped walking, turning to face the water. "I've never told anyone this, but I've been scared to really love someone since then. Everyone I got close to in the service, well, let's just say not everyone came home." Marlene's heart ached at the raw honesty in his voice. "I understand fear," she said softly. "After John died, the thought of caring that deeply about someone again, it terrified me. Still does." "Yeah." Rock turned to look at her, his eyes vulnerable in the lamplight. "The deeper you love, the more you have to lose," Marlene said, voicing the fear that had lived in her heart since John's passing. "And I'm not sure I could survive losing someone like that again." Rock nodded slowly, understanding written across his features. They stood there in the gentle evening light, two people who had known loss, who carried their scars carefully hidden, who recognized in each other a shared fear of opening their hearts again. The river flowed steadily beside them, its quiet presence a witness to their moment of shared vulnerability. In the distance, a church bell chimed 9 times, its sound carrying clearly across the water. The morning sun had barely crept over the horizon when sharp knocks jolted Marlene awake. She blinked, disoriented, as the urgent pounding continued. Throwing on her robe, she hurried to the door of her motel room. Through the peephole, she saw Rock's large frame, his shoulders tense, and his usual calm demeanor replaced with visible agitation. Her heart skipped a beat as she quickly unlocked the door. "Rock, what's wrong?" He stepped inside, running a hand through his disheveled beard. His eyes darted around the room before settling on her face. "I'm sorry to wake you like this, Marlene. Something's happened back in the city with the club." Marlene wrapped her robe tighter around herself, watching as Rock paced the small space between the bed and the window. His motorcycle boots left heavy footprints in the thin carpet. "My phone's been blowing up all night," he continued, pulling out his cell phone and showing her the screen full of missed calls. "There's trouble. Big trouble. I need to head back right now." "What kind of trouble?" Marlene asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The worry in Rock's eyes made her stomach clench. "The kind I can't ignore." He stopped pacing and faced her directly. "Some of my brothers are in a bad situation. I've got responsibilities I can't walk away from. Not yet." Marlene sank onto the edge of the bed, her mind racing. Just last night they'd shared such intimate moments by the river. Now, reality was crashing in like a tidal wave, reminding her of who Rock really was, a member of the Hells Angels, with all the danger and uncertainty that came with it. "Will you—" She hesitated, unsure how to ask what she really wanted to know. "Will you be safe?" Rock's expression softened for a moment. He crossed the room and knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. His rough palms felt warm against her skin. "I wish I could promise you that," he said honestly. "But I don't make promises I'm not sure I can keep." Marlene nodded, appreciating his honesty even as it scared her. She watched as he stood up and began gathering his few belongings from around the room. His movements were quick and efficient, speaking of years of practice at making fast exits. "I don't know how long this will take," he said, shoving his things into a worn leather bag. "But Marlene—" He paused, looking at her intently. "What we talked about last night, it meant something to me." "You mean something to me?" Marlene felt tears pricking at her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "Be careful, Rock." He nodded, slinging his bag over his shoulder. At the door, he turned back one last time, his face set with determination. Then he was gone, his heavy footsteps echoing down the motel's concrete walkway. Marlene moved to the window, pushing aside the thin curtain. She watched as Rock strode to his motorcycle, his broad shoulders straight despite the weight of whatever waited for him in the city. He swung his leg over the bike, kicked it to life, and with one last look toward her window, roared out of the parking lot. The rumble of his motorcycle faded into the distance, leaving Marlene alone with her thoughts and the growing knot of worry in her stomach. She stood at the window long after he'd disappeared, trying to process what had just happened, and wondering if this was the end of whatever had been growing between them. The days after Rock's abrupt departure crawled by with agonizing slowness. Marlene found herself checking her phone constantly, each time disappointed to find no messages from him. She tried to maintain her routine, morning coffee at the local diner, afternoon walks in the park, but everything felt hollow without his presence. In the diner, she couldn't help but stare at the corner booth where they'd shared so many conversations. Sarah, the friendly waitress who'd watched their relationship unfold, noticed her distraction. "More coffee, hun?" Sarah asked, already tilting the pot toward Marlene's cup. "Thanks." Marlene wrapped her hands around the warm mug, drawing comfort from its familiar weight. "I keep thinking I'll look up and see him walking through that door." Sarah's expression softened with understanding. "Men like that? They're complicated. Got layers most folks don't. See?" Marlene nodded, remembering how Rock's tough exterior had gradually revealed a gentle, wounded soul beneath. But now doubt crept in like a cold draft. Maybe she'd been foolish to let her guard down. Maybe this was just another loss to add to her collection. Back in her motel room, Marlene tried to keep busy. She reorganized her suitcase, called her sister back home, and even started reading a paperback she'd bought at the gas station. But her thoughts kept drifting to Rock, to the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her, to the careful way he'd opened up about his past, to the tenderness in his touch. "You're being ridiculous," she told her reflection in the bathroom mirror. "He's probably forgotten all about you already." But even as she said the words, she knew they weren't true. The connection they'd shared had been real, She'd felt it in her bones. On her afternoon walks, she found herself taking different routes, avoiding the spots where they'd spent time together. The river path where he'd confessed his fears about love felt too raw, too full of memories. Instead, she walked through the town's quiet residential streets, watching normal life unfold around her. Children playing, couples gardening, elderly neighbors chatting over fences. In the evenings, loneliness pressed in like a physical presence. Marlene had gotten used to Rock's unexpected visits, his gentle knock on her door, his deep voice sharing stories late into the night. Now the silence felt oppressive. On the fourth day, just as she was considering packing up and heading home, her phone buzzed. Her heart leaped when she saw Rock's name on the screen. With trembling fingers, she opened the message. "I'm safe. Need time to handle things here. Think about you every day." Marlene read the message over and over, relief and frustration warring in her chest. She was grateful he was okay, but his words left so many questions unanswered. What kind of trouble was he dealing with? How long would it take? Would he come back to her when it was over? She sat on the edge of her bed, phone clutched in her hand, torn between responding immediately and making him wait like she had. In the end, she simply typed, "Stay safe." Setting the phone aside, Marlene walked to the window and looked out at the quiet town street. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, letting out a long breath. Rock was alive and thinking of her. That would have to be enough for now. The afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the creek's surface. Marlene sat on the wooden bench, watching the water flow past, each ripple carrying her thoughts away. A week had passed since Rock's cryptic text, and she'd almost convinced herself it was time to leave this small town behind. The crunch of footsteps on gravel made her turn. Her heart skipped when she saw Rock approaching, his broad shoulders hunched, slightly, his usual confidence dimmed. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes and a tenseness in his jaw that hadn't been there before. "Marlene," he said softly, stopping a few feet away. His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it much lately. She didn't answer immediately, studying his face instead. The man who'd kissed her so boldly at the gas station seemed far away now, replaced by someone carrying a heavy burden. "May I?" He gestured to the empty space beside her on the bench. She nodded, sliding over slightly. The wood creaked under his weight as he sat down, leaving a careful distance between them. "I'm sorry," Rock began, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "I shouldn't have left like that, without explaining." "No, you shouldn't have." Marlene's voice was quiet but firm. The hurt of the past week crystallized into words she couldn't hold back. "Do you know what it's like, waiting for days, not knowing if you're okay, not knowing if you'll ever come back?" Rock winced. "I wanted to tell you more, but I couldn't. There are things in my past, people who know me from before. They can be dangerous." "The Hell's Angels?" Marlene asked, though she already knew the answer. He nodded slowly. "Some of them aren't happy I'm trying to leave that life behind. They showed up at my old place, looking for me, made threats." His fists clenched. "I had to go deal with it, make sure they wouldn't come here, wouldn't find—" He trailed off, looking at her with pain in his eyes. "Wouldn't find you. So you just disappeared?" Marlene felt tears threatening, but held them back. "Left me wondering, worrying? I thought I was protecting you." Rock turned toward her, his expression pleading. "Everything I did was to keep you safe." "That wasn't your choice to make," Marlene said, standing up. Her legs felt unsteady, but her voice remained strong. I'm not some fragile thing that needs to be sheltered. I needed to know the truth. I needed you to trust me enough to tell me what was happening. Marlene, please. Rock stood too, reaching for her hand, but she pulled away. No, she said, wrapping her arms around herself. I can't do this. I can't be with someone who keeps secrets, who disappears when things get tough. I've spent too long being afraid of losing people I love. I won't live that way anymore. Rock's face crumpled, the tough exterior completely gone now. What are you saying? I'm saying I can't be with someone who isn't fully open with me. Marlene took a step back, each word feeling like a stone in her chest. I need honesty, Rock. Complete honesty. He stood there, silent and still, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Marlene watched him go, her heart breaking with each step he took, but she didn't call him back. The creek continued to flow beside her, its gentle sound now a mockery of the peace she'd felt here with him, just days ago. Marlene sat in the circle of women at the community center, clutching a paper cup of lukewarm coffee. The familiar faces of her widow's support group surrounded her, each one marked by their own journey through loss and healing. Today, instead of listening, she found herself speaking. I pushed him away, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. After everything we shared, I just couldn't handle the uncertainty. Sarah, a woman in her 50s who'd lost her husband 3 years ago, leaned forward. Tell us about him, Marlene. What makes this man different? Marlene stared into her coffee, watching the surface ripple with her slight trembling. He's nothing like Tom was. He's rough around the edges, intimidating even. But when he looks at me... She paused, struggling to find the right words. It's like he sees all of me, even the parts I try to hide. And that scares you? Betty, the group facilitator, asked gently. Everything about this scares me, Marlene admitted. His past with the motorcycle gang, the way he disappeared, how strongly I feel about him after such a short time. She took a shaky breath. But what scares me most is how much I miss him. The women nodded, understanding written across their faces. Many of them had wrestled with similar feelings, the terror of opening their hearts again after loss. You know, Linda, one of the older members, spoke up. My Harold always used to say that the heart doesn't know time. It just knows what it feels. Marlene spent the next few days turning these words over in her mind. She walked through the small town, past the diner where she and Rock had shared meals, past the creek where they'd opened up to each other. Each spot held memories that made her heart ache. In her motel room that evening, she pulled out an old photo of Tom from her wallet. His kind face smiled back at her, and for the first time, she didn't feel guilty about her feelings for Rock. I'll always love you, she whispered to the photo. But I think it's time for me to be brave again. The next morning she met with Sarah for coffee at the local cafe. The morning sun streamed through the windows, warming their table as they talked. I keep thinking about what you said at group, Sarah said, stirring her tea. About how he makes you feel seen. That's rare, Marlene, really rare. But his past is exactly that, his past, Sarah interrupted. We all have baggage. The question is, are you willing to help him carry his? Marlene thought about Rock's vulnerability when he'd told her about his military service, about the pain in his eyes when he spoke of wanting to leave his old life behind. She thought about his protective instincts, not just physical, but emotional too. He tried to protect me, she said slowly. In his own way, even when he left, he was trying to keep me safe. Maybe it's time to let someone care about you again, Sarah suggested softly. Even if it's not perfect. Even if it's scary. Later that afternoon, Marlene stood in front of her motel room mirror. The woman looking back at her seemed different somehow. Stronger, more determined. She thought about all the times she'd let fear hold her back since Tom's death, all the moments of connection she'd denied herself. No more, she whispered to her reflection. She grabbed her car keys, her heart racing but her mind clear. It was time to find Rock, to give him the chance to explain everything. It was time to be brave enough to love again. The neon signs cast a soft glow through the windows of Jake's Bar and Grill as Marlene pulled into the gravel parking lot. Her hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel as she spotted Rock's motorcycle parked near the entrance. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out of her car and walked toward the entrance with determined steps. The bar was dimly lit, with country music playing softly in the background. A few locals sat scattered around, but her eyes immediately found Rock. He sat alone at the far end of the bar, his broad shoulders hunched over a glass of amber liquid. Even from behind, she could see the tension in his posture. Marlene's heels clicked against the wooden floor as she approached. Rock's head lifted at the sound, but he didn't turn around. She slid onto the bar stool beside him, her heart pounding in her chest. "Hi," she said softly. Rock's fingers tightened around his glass. "Marlene," he breathed, his voice rough with emotion. "I didn't expect to see you again." "I wasn't sure I'd come," she admitted, "but I'm here now, and I'm not angry anymore." She placed her purse on the bar and turned to face him fully. "I want to hear what happened, Rock, all of it." He finally looked at her, his eyes searching her face. The tough exterior she'd first seen at the gas station was gone, replaced by something raw and vulnerable. "You sure about that? It ain't pretty." "I'm sure." She nodded toward an empty booth in the corner. "Maybe we could talk somewhere more private." Rock grabbed his drink, and they moved to the booth. Marlene slid in across from him, watching as he gathered his thoughts. The overhead lamp cast shadows across his face, highlighting the worry lines around his eyes. "The club," he started, his voice low. "They've been my family for 15 years. After the military, when I had nothing and no one, they took me in." He took a sip of his drink. "But lately, things have been changing. Some of the younger guys, they want to take things in a direction I can't follow." Marlene listened intently, noting how his hands clenched and unclenched as he spoke. "That day I left," he continued, "there was going to be trouble. Bad trouble. I had to go back to try and talk some sense into them." He met her eyes. "I couldn't let you get caught up in that mess. You're too important." "And did you? Talk sense into them?" Rock shook his head slowly. "I tried. But I realized something while I was there. I don't belong there, anymore. Haven't for a while, if I'm being honest." He leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. "The thing is, Marlene, I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you, and it scares the hell out of me because I don't want to lose you." His confession hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Marlene could see the cost of this honesty in the way he held himself, tense and waiting for her response. "These past few days," he went on, "being away from you, it made me realize how much I want a different life, a better one." He ran a hand through his beard. "But I need you to understand what you'd be getting into. The club, they won't like me walking away. It won't be easy." His eyes held hers, filled with a mixture of hope and fear. Marlene sat quietly, absorbing everything he'd said, seeing the sincerity written across his weathered face. Marlene reached across the table and placed her hand over Rock's calloused one. The simple gesture made his shoulders relax slightly, though tension still lined his face. "I appreciate your honesty," she said softly, "and I understand why you left the way you did. But Rock, if we're going to have any kind of future, I need to know that you're truly ready to leave that life behind." Rock turned his hand over, his fingers intertwining with hers. The warmth of his touch sent a flutter through her chest. "Being part of the club," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "it gave me purpose when I had none. After the military, I was lost. They became my family." He paused, taking a deep breath. "But lately, every time I'm with them, it feels wrong, like I'm wearing clothes that don't fit anymore." "And what feels right?" Marlene asked, her heart beating faster. "This." He squeezed her hand gently. "Being here with you, talking like this. For the first time in years, I feel peaceful." He let out a quiet laugh. "Never thought I'd say that word." Marlene felt tears prick at her corners of her eyes. "After losing Richard, I thought that was it for me. I told myself I was too old to start over, that I'd had my chance at love." She wiped at her eyes with her free hand. "But being with you these past few weeks, it's awakened something in me I thought was gone forever." "I want out," Rock said firmly. "Out of the club, out of that life. It won't be easy, but I'm willing to face whatever comes if it means having a chance with you." "Are you sure?" Marlene searched his face. "I don't want you to regret giving up your life for me." "I'm not giving up my life," he corrected her gently. "I'm choosing a better one that feels real and right." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "I've done a lot of things I'm not proud of, Marlene, but loving you, that's the one thing that makes sense." Marlene's breath caught at the word loving. She hadn't expected to hear it so soon, but it didn't frighten her the way she thought it would. "I want to be happy again," she admitted. "To wake up in the morning looking forward to the day ahead. To share my life with someone who understands me." She squeezed his hand. "When I'm with you, I feel that possibility." Rock's face softened. "So where do we go from here?" "Maybe we take it slow," Marlene suggested. "One day at a time. You focus on leaving the club safely, and I'll be here, supporting you through it." "You'd do that? Stand by me through all of this?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "We've both been through enough in life to know that nothing worth having comes easy. I want to give us a real chance, Rock." Relief washed over his face. "One day at a time," he repeated, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I like the sound of that." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, their hands still joined on the table, both feeling the weight of the decision they'd just made. It wouldn't be an easy road ahead, but they'd face it together, one step at a time. The late morning sun filtered through the diner's windows as Marlene stirred her coffee, watching Rock across the table. Over the past 3 weeks, their morning meetings had become a comfortable routine. She noticed the subtle changes in him, how his shoulders seemed less tense, how his smile came more easily. "I spoke with my club president yesterday," Rock said, his voice low and steady. "Made it clear I'm stepping away. It wasn't easy, but he understood." Marlene's hand paused mid-stir. "How did it go?" "Better than I expected. 20 years of loyalty counts for something." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "I've been saving up, you know, thinking about opening my own motorcycle repair shop here in town." Pride swelled in Marlene's chest. Each day, Rock showed her another piece of himself, another sign that he was serious about changing his life. Last week, he'd helped Mrs. Peterson, the elderly woman next door to the motel, fix her car without accepting payment. The day before that, he'd spent hours on the phone with his VA counselor, finally ready to address his past trauma. "I think that's wonderful," she said, meaning it. You've always been good with your hands. Rock's eyes crinkled at the corners. Speaking of which, I finished that shelf you wanted for your motel room, the one for your books. Later that afternoon, Marlene watched as Rock carefully mounted the handcrafted wooden shelf to her motel room wall. The care he took, the precision in his movements, it touched something deep inside her. This was a man who could be gentle, despite his rough exterior. Perfect, she said when he finished. Rock stepped back to admire his work. Just needs one thing. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, wrapped package. Marlene unwrapped it carefully, revealing a delicate ceramic angel. Oh, Rock. Saw it in that antique shop downtown, he said, shuffling his feet slightly. Reminded me of that story you told me about your mother's collection. Tears pricked at Marlene's eyes as she placed the angel on the shelf. It was such a small thing, but it showed how carefully he listened, how much he paid attention to the things that mattered to her. The days that followed brought more quiet moments of connection. They took evening walks by the creek, where Rock would point out different birds and tell her about learning to hunt with his grandfather. Marlene shared stories about her life with Richard, and for the first time, talking about him didn't bring that sharp pain to her chest. One particularly peaceful evening, they sat together on the small couch in Marlene's motel room. Rock had brought over takeout from their favorite Chinese restaurant, and they'd spent hours talking about everything and nothing. You know, Marlene said, her hand comfortably enclosed in his, I never thought I'd feel this way again. This contentment. Rock's thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. Me neither. Always thought I was too broken for something like this. We're not broken, Marlene said softly. Just a little weathered, like that old oak tree by the creek. Rock smiled at that, and they sat in comfortable silence, the evening light casting long shadows across the room. The television played quietly in the background, but neither paid it much attention. They were too absorbed in the simple pleasure of being together, feeling the peace that had gradually settled into their lives. The evening had started peacefully enough. Rock and Marlene were sharing leftover Chinese food, watching an old Western movie in her motel room when his phone buzzed. The caller ID made Rock's jaw tighten. He stepped outside, leaving Marlene with a concerned look on her face. Through the window she could see his broad shoulders tense as he paced back and forth. His free hand clenched and unclenched, a habit she'd noticed whenever he was stressed. After what felt like forever, he came back inside, his face dark with worry. That was Snake, Rock said, his voice rough. Things are getting bad with a rival club. They need me back there. Marlene's heart sank. She set down her plate and moved closer to him. What kind of bad? The kind that could get ugly fast. Rock ran a hand through his beard, his eyes distant. Snake says they need someone who knows how to handle these situations. Someone with experience. You mean someone who knows how to fight? Marlene said quietly. She reached for his hand, feeling the calluses beneath her fingers. Rock, you've been doing so well. You're building a new life here. He squeezed her hand, but wouldn't meet her eyes. I know, but these guys, they're like brothers to me. We've been through hell together. And what about the life you're trying to build now? Marlene's voice trembled slightly. The repair shop you're planning? The peace you found here? Rock sat heavily on the edge of the bed. I can't just abandon them. You're not abandoning them, Marlene said firmly. You're choosing a different path, one that doesn't involve violence and revenge. She knelt in front of him, forcing him to look at her. Remember what you told me about your time in the military? How you promised yourself you were done with fighting? His eyes softened at her words. Yeah, I remember, The club was there for you when you needed them, she continued. But now you have a chance at something different, something peaceful. She touched his cheek gently. You deserve that peace, Rock. He leaned into her touch, closing his eyes. What if they don't understand? Then that's their problem, not yours. Marlene's voice was steady now. You've already told your president you're leaving. Going back now? It'll just pull you right back in. Rock was quiet for a long moment, his internal struggle visible on his face. Finally, he pulled out his phone and dialed Snake's number. Marlene held her breath as she listened to his side of the conversation. Listen, brother, Rock said, his voice firm but kind. I can't come back. Not for this, not for anything. He paused, listening. No, you don't understand. I'm done with that life, for good. Another pause, longer this time. Rock's free hand found Marlene's and held tight. I love you guys like brothers, you know that. But I found something here, something real. His eyes met Marlene's. Something worth protecting in a different way. When he finally hung up, the tension seemed to drain from his body. He pulled Marlene close, burying his face in her hair. No matter what happens, he murmured, I want to be with you. That life, it's behind me now. For good. Marlene wrapped her arms around him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her chest. She knew this wouldn't be the last time his past tried to pull him back. But for now, in this moment, he had chosen their future together. The morning sun cast long shadows across the motel parking lot as Rock prepared to leave. He wore his old leather vest, but something about it looked different on him now, like a costume rather than a second skin. Marlene stood by her door, arms wrapped around herself against the early morning chill. I'll be back before dark, Rock promised, his voice gruff but gentle. Just need to make things clear with Snake face to face. Marlene nodded, trying to hide her worry. Be careful, she said softly. The words felt inadequate against the knot of fear in her stomach. Rock cupped her face in his large hands and kissed her forehead. Always am, darlin'. Then he was gone, the rumble of his motorcycle fading into the distance. The hours crawled by like molasses. Marlene tried to keep busy. She cleaned her already tidy room, walked to the diner for coffee, and attempted to read a magazine. But her eyes kept drifting to the clock, watching minutes tick past with agonizing slowness. By mid-afternoon, she was pacing. The sound of every motorcycle that passed made her heart jump. She'd seen enough movies to know how these confrontations could go wrong. What if Snake wasn't willing to let Rock walk away? What if there was violence? The what-ifs tormented her until she couldn't sit still. She found herself at the window again and again, pushing aside the curtain to peer out at the parking lot. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Rock had promised to be back before dark, but the shadows were growing longer with each passing minute. Just when her anxiety threatened to overwhelm her, she heard it, the distinctive rumble of Rock's motorcycle. She rushed to the door, flinging it open just as he pulled into the parking lot. Rock cut the engine and sat there for a moment, his broad shoulders sagging with exhaustion. When he finally dismounted and turned toward her, Marlene could see the weariness in his face. But there was something else too, a lightness she hadn't seen before, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. He walked toward her slowly, his boots scuffing against the asphalt. When he reached her, he didn't speak immediately, just wrapped his arms around her and held her close. Marlene could feel his heart beating steady and strong against her cheek. It's done, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. I'm out, for good this time. Marlene pulled back just enough to look up at his face. They accepted it? Just like that? Rock's laugh was tired but genuine. Wasn't exactly just like that. Snake wasn't happy. There was some shouting, some threats. He shook his head. But in the end, they knew I meant it. 20 years of loyalty counts for something, even with them. And they'll leave you alone? Marlene couldn't keep the worry from her voice. Yeah, Rock nodded, running a hand through his beard. Snake gave me his word. It might not mean much to most people, but in our world, the world I'm leaving behind, it means everything. Relief flooded through Marlene, making her knees weak. Rock steadied her, his strong hands gentle on her shoulders. I told them about you, he said softly. Told them I'd found something real, something worth changing for. His eyes met hers, full of warmth and certainty. They might not understand it, but they respect it. Marlene reached up to touch his face, feeling the rough texture of his beard under her fingers. She could see in his eyes that this was true. He had really done it. He had chosen their future together over his past, and somehow, impossibly, he had managed to walk away clean. The rental car hummed softly as Rock and Marlene drove along the winding country road. The morning sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the dashboard. Rock looked different behind the wheel of the sedan, softer somehow, despite his intimidating frame and tattoos. He'd traded his leather vest for a plain black t-shirt, and Marlene couldn't help but notice how the change suited him. There's supposed to be a nice breakfast place up ahead, Marlene said, consulting the map on her phone. The reviews say they make amazing blueberry pancakes. Rock smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. Sounds perfect. Been a while since I had a proper breakfast that wasn't at that motel diner. The small town of Pine Grove appeared around the bend, its main street lined with historic buildings painted in cheerful colors. American flags fluttered from lampposts, and window boxes overflowed with bright flowers. It was exactly the kind of place Marlene had always dreamed of settling down in. Peaceful, friendly, and far from the chaos of their old lives. They found the breakfast place easily, a cozy cottage-style restaurant called Morning Glory. The bell above the door chimed as they entered, and the hostess greeted them with a genuine smile, showing no reaction to Rock's intimidating appearance. Welcome to Morning Glory. Table for two? Their table by the window offered a view of the town square, where children played around an old-fashioned gazebo. Rock watched them while sipping his coffee, his expression thoughtful. It's nice here, he said quietly. Peaceful. Marlene reached across the table and squeezed his hand. It really is. After breakfast, they walked hand in hand down the main street, window shopping and taking in the atmosphere. The locals they passed nodded friendly greetings. No one stared at Rock's tattoos or whispered about his appearance. Here, they were just another couple enjoying a morning stroll. There's a real estate office, Marlene pointed out, trying to sound casual. Want to take a look? Rock stopped walking, turning to face her. You serious about staying here? I think I am, she admitted, unless you're not ready. Been ready for a change for longer than I knew, Rock said, his voice gruff with emotion. Just needed the right reason. The real estate agent, a woman named Sarah, was happy to show them some properties right away. As they drove through the outskirts of town, she pointed out a small craftsman-style house set back from the road. The yard was overgrown, and the paint was peeling, but something about it caught both their attention. It needs some work, Sarah admitted as they walked through. But it's got good bones. Rock ran his hand along the solid wooden banister of the staircase. Nothing wrong with a little work, he said, glancing at Marlene. Sometimes the things worth having need some fixing up. Marlene explored the sunny kitchen, with its vintage cabinets and large windows overlooking the backyard. She could already picture morning coffee at the kitchen table, watching birds at the feeder. She could see Rock working in the yard, maybe starting a vegetable garden. Simple things, peaceful things, the kind of life they both deserved. When they met back up in the living room, they didn't need to speak. The look they shared said everything. This was it, their fresh start, their new beginning. "We'll take it," Rock told Sarah, his hand finding Marlene's and squeezing gently. Standing in what would soon be their living room, Marlene felt a profound sense of rightness. This house, this town, this man beside her, it all felt real in a way nothing had since losing her husband. Not a replacement for what she'd lost, but something new and wonderful in its own right. The early morning light streamed through the kitchen windows, catching dust motes that danced in the air as Rock and Marlene worked together to paint the walls a warm butter yellow. Classical music played softly from Marlene's old radio, and the smell of fresh coffee mingled with the paint fumes. "You missed a spot," Marlene teased, pointing to a section near the ceiling. Rock stretched his tall frame, easily reaching the spot she'd indicated. "Good thing you've got me around for the high places," he said with a wink. The house was slowly coming together. They'd spent the past few weeks fixing what needed fixing, replacing broken window panes, patching holes in the walls, and giving everything a fresh coat of paint. Rock had surprised Marlene with his handyman skills, though she supposed she shouldn't have been shocked. Those strong hands that had once caused so much trouble were just as capable of creating and repairing. After the morning's painting session, they took their coffee onto the back porch. The overgrown yard was starting to look more manageable after Rock's determined efforts with a borrowed lawnmower. He'd even planted some tomatoes and peppers in a small garden plot, something that made Marlene smile every time she saw it. "Never thought I'd be the type to get excited about growing vegetables," Rock admitted, following her gaze to the garden. "Life's full of surprises," Marlene said, leaning against his shoulder. Their days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Mornings started with coffee and breakfast together, sometimes just toast and eggs, other times Marlene's special pancakes that Rock couldn't get enough of. They worked on the house, took walks into town for supplies, and gradually became part of the community. The neighbors, initially wary of Rock's intimidating appearance, warmed to him after he helped Mr. Johnson next door fix his car and rescued Mrs. Peterson's cat from a tree. Marlene loved watching the transformation, not just of their house, but of Rock himself. The tension he'd always carried in his shoulders seemed to ease day by day. One afternoon, they walked to the local hardware store for more supplies. Rock carried the heavy bags while Marlene consulted her list of projects. People on the street greeted them by name now, and Rock nodded back, comfortable in a way he'd never been before. "Remember that first day at the gas station?" Marlene asked as they walked home. "If someone had told me then that we'd end up here?" Rock chuckled, the sound deep and genuine. "You would have run for the hills." "Probably," she agreed with a laugh. "But I'm glad I didn't." Back at the house, they worked together to hang new curtains in the living room. The simple domestic task felt significant somehow, another small step in making this house their home. Rock held the ladder steady, while Marlene climbed up to adjust the curtain rod, and she felt completely safe under his watchful eye. As evening approached, they settled onto the porch swing Rock had installed the week before. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming jasmine from their neighbor's yard. Rock's arm rested comfortably around Marlene's shoulders as they swayed gently on the swing. Neither felt the need to speak. They just sat together, watching the sky change colors, listening to the chirp of crickets and the distant sound of children playing somewhere down the street. It was a simple moment, but perfect in its simplicity. Two people who had found peace in each other's company, in a home they'd made together. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across their backyard as Rock paced nervously behind the house. He'd been planning this moment for weeks, wanting everything to be perfect. His weathered hands fidgeted with the small velvet box in his pocket, so different from the rough lifestyle he'd left behind. Inside, Marlene was preparing dinner, humming along to an old love song on the radio. The smell of her famous pot roast wafted through the open windows. Rock took a deep breath, gathering his courage. He'd faced down dangerous men without flinching, but this moment made his heart race like never before. "Marlene," he called out, his voice surprisingly steady. "Could you come out here for a minute?" "Just a second," she replied. A moment later she appeared on the back porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Her silver hair caught the golden light, and Rock's breath caught in his throat at the sight of her. "What is it?" she asked, noticing his serious expression. "Is everything okay?" Rock gestured to the garden they'd planted together. The tomatoes were ripening on the vine, and the flowers they'd planted were in full bloom. "Remember when we first started working on this yard?" he asked, his voice soft. "It was all weeds and bare patches." Marlene nodded, stepping down from the porch to join him. "Look at it now," she said proudly. "Everything's growing so beautifully." "Just like us," Rock said, taking her hand in his. His tattooed fingers intertwined with hers, a contrast that no longer seemed strange to either of them. "You know, Marlene, I never thought I'd have something like this. A real home. Peace. Love." Marlene squeezed his hand, her eyes growing misty. She could feel the tremor in his fingers, so unlike his usual steady strength. "That day at the gas station," Rock continued, "when I kissed you. I was trying to protect you, but I ended up finding something I didn't even know I was looking for." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "You've shown me what real love is supposed to be like. Not possession or control, but partnership and trust." Marlene's free hand went to her heart as Rock slowly lowered himself to one knee. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, and somewhere in the distance, a mockingbird sang. "I know I'm not the man most people would expect you to choose," Rock said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've got a past that's far from perfect, but you've helped me become someone better, someone worthy of the love you've given me." Tears rolled down Marlene's cheeks as Rock pulled the small velvet box from his pocket. His hands shook slightly as he opened it, revealing a delicate vintage ring with a single diamond that caught the evening light. "Marlene Brooks," he said, looking up at her with eyes full of love and hope, "would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I promise to spend every day making sure you never regret taking a chance on this old biker." Marlene's hand trembled as she reached out to touch his cheek, feeling the familiar scratch of his beard against her palm. In his eyes, she saw everything she'd been afraid to hope for after losing her first husband. Love, security, and the promise of a future filled with joy. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, I'll marry you, Rock." The morning sun filtered through the stained glass windows of the small chapel, casting rainbow patterns across the wooden pews. Marlene stood in the small side room, adjusting her cream-colored dress, elegant and simple, just like she wanted. Her silver hair was styled with tiny white flowers, and her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed down the fabric. "You look beautiful," Sarah, her friend from the Widows' Support Group, said softly. She stepped forward to help Marlene with her pearl necklace, a cherished piece that had belonged to her mother. "I never thought I'd be doing this again," Marlene admitted, touching the pearls gently. "But it feels right, doesn't it?" Sarah squeezed her hand. "It feels perfect." In another room, Rock adjusted his dark suit jacket, looking almost uncomfortable in the formal wear. His beard was neatly trimmed, and his long hair was pulled back tidily. His old army buddy, Mike, helped him with his tie. "Never thought I'd see you like this," Mike chuckled, straightening the knot. "But she's changed you, hasn't she?" Rock's weathered face softened. "She showed me there was more to life than what I was living." The small chapel slowly filled with their closest friends, a mixture of Marlene's support group members, Rock's military buddies who'd left their rough lives behind, and the few family members they had left. There were no sides in this wedding. Everyone sat together, a testament to how their two worlds had merged into one. As the gentle notes of piano music filled the air, Rock took his place at the altar. His hands were clasped in front of him, and despite his imposing figure, there was a vulnerability in his stance that touched everyone who knew him. When Marlene appeared, at the chapel doors, Rock's breath caught in his throat. She walked slowly down the aisle, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers, the same kinds that grew in their garden at home. Her eyes met his, and suddenly, the small crowd disappeared. It was just the two of them, two hearts that had found each other against all odds. The ceremony was simple, but meaningful. They exchanged traditional vows, their voices steady and sure. When Rock slipped the wedding band onto Marlene's finger, his tattooed hands were gentle, treating her like the most precious thing in the world. Marlene's hands didn't shake at all as she placed his ring on his finger. She'd never been more certain of anything in her life. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister said warmly. "You may kiss the bride." Rock cupped Marlene's face in his hands with infinite tenderness and kissed her. The small gathering erupted in applause and cheers, a few happy tears being wiped away among their guests. As they walked back down the aisle together, rice and flower petals showered down around them. They paused at the chapel doors, taking a moment just for themselves while their guests gathered for the reception. "Mrs. Marlene Davidson," Rock said softly, using his real surname that so few people knew. Marlene squeezed his hand, looking up at him with eyes full of joy. Who would have thought a gas station kiss would lead to this? They stood there, hand in hand, the warm breeze carrying the scent of spring flowers. Behind them, their friends and family chatted happily, waiting to continue the celebration. But for just this moment, they stayed still, savoring the beginning of their new life together. The morning after their wedding, Marlene woke to sunlight streaming through the windows of their small house. Rock's arm was draped protectively around her waist, his breathing steady and peaceful. She smiled, remembering yesterday's simple but perfect ceremony. The house was quiet, except for the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from Sarah. Their home wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. Fresh paint brightened the walls, and Rock had spent weeks fixing up the old wooden floors until they gleamed. Marlene carefully slipped out of bed, pulling on her soft robe. In the kitchen, she started the coffee maker, enjoying the familiar morning routine. The ring on her finger caught the morning light, and she paused to admire it. It wasn't flashy, just a simple gold band with a small diamond, but to her, it was perfect. Rock appeared in the doorway, his hair tousled from sleep. Even after all this time, the sight of him made her heart skip a beat. His tough exterior had softened around the edges, but he still carried himself with that quiet strength she'd first noticed at the gas station. "Morning, wife," he said, his voice rough with sleep. The word wife came out tender, almost reverent. "Good morning, husband," Marlene replied, handing him a steaming cup of coffee. They moved around the kitchen together with easy familiarity, preparing breakfast. Rock made toast while Marlene scrambled eggs, their movements synchronized after months of sharing the same space. Through the window above the sink, they could see their small garden where Rock had planted vegetables and flowers, a hobby that had surprised them both. "The tomatoes are coming in nicely," Marlene observed, watching a robin hop between the plants. Rock wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Never thought I'd be excited about growing tomatoes," he chuckled. "But here we are." After breakfast, they sat on their front porch swing, another of Rock's restoration projects. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of blooming flowers. Their quiet street was just beginning to wake up, neighbors walking their dogs or heading out for morning jogs. Mrs. Peterson from next door waved as she collected her newspaper. She'd been wary of Rock at first, but now she brought them cookies every Sunday. It was just one of the many ways their life had settled into something beautiful and ordinary. "Think we should plant those rose bushes today?" Rock asked, his hand finding Marlene's. She squeezed his fingers, noting how his tattoos now seemed less like marks of a troubled past and more like part of who he was, the man who had chosen love over darkness. "I'd like that," she said. They sat there, watching the world wake up around them, both marveling at how natural it felt. Rock, once so out of place in domestic settings, now looked completely at home on their porch swing. Marlene, who had thought her chance at love was over, felt her heart full to bursting with happiness. The simple gold bands on their fingers caught the morning light. They weren't just symbols of their marriage. They were reminders of the journey that had brought them here. From that first startling kiss at the gas station to this quiet morning on their porch, they had built something precious together. Rock brought Marlene's hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. The gesture was so tender, so unlike the rough biker he'd once been. Marlene leaned her head against his shoulder, breathing in the peaceful moment. They didn't need words to express what they both felt. The profound gratitude for this second chance at love, the joy of finding each other, and the peace that came with knowing they were exactly where they were meant to be. Rock and Marlene sat in their cozy living room, the afternoon sun casting warm shadows through the curtains. Rock's leather jacket, now worn soft with age, hung by the door, a reminder of the man he used to be. Marlene's collection of family photos lined the walls, including new ones of them together, showing their journey from strangers to soulmates. "Remember that day at the gas station?" Marlene asked, a smile playing at her lips. She was curled up on their comfortable old sofa, a quilt draped across her legs. Rock's deep laugh rumbled through his chest. "How could I forget? You were ready to deck me right there in front of everyone." He sat beside her, his large frame settling into the cushions. The tattoos on his arms had faded slightly, but they told the story of his past, a past he'd faced and overcome with Marlene by his side. "I thought you were the most arrogant man I'd ever met," she admitted, reaching for his hand. His fingers, once used to gripping handlebars and throwing punches, now intertwined gently with hers. "But there was something about you. Something that scared you half to death," he finished, his eyes twinkling. "That wasn't fear," she corrected him softly. "It was recognition. I saw someone who was just as lonely as I was, even if neither of us wanted to admit it." Rock nodded, understanding flowing between them. The silence that followed was comfortable, filled with shared memories and unspoken gratitude. Through the window, they could see their garden, where Rock had spent countless hours working the soil, finding peace in the simple act of helping things grow. "You know what amazes me?" he said, his voice thoughtful. "How easy it is now, being together, being happy." The word still felt new on his tongue, but true. After losing Tom, I never thought— Marlene's voice caught slightly. I never thought I could feel this kind of peace again. Rock pulled her closer, protective and gentle all at once. We both had to learn that love isn't about replacing what we lost. It's about making room for something new. Marlene looked up at him, seeing the changes time had wrought. The hard edges that had first drawn her eye were still there, but they'd softened. His eyes, once guarded and fierce, now held warmth and certainty. He was still the strong, imposing man she'd met, but he'd grown into someone who could be both powerful and tender. We've come so far, she murmured, thinking of all the obstacles they'd overcome. The judgmental looks from strangers, the whispers about their age difference, Rock's struggle to leave his old life behind. None of it had broken them. Together, Rock agreed, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. That's what matters. Everything else is just noise. They sat in their home, surrounded by the life they'd built together. Photos of their wedding day sat next to Marlene's memories of Tom and Rock's military service medals. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was theirs, created from the ashes of their past lives and forged into something beautiful and lasting. The afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across their living room floor. Rock's hand remained steady in Marlene's, their fingers interlocked, a simple gesture that spoke volumes about their journey. They'd found each other when they least expected it, proved that love could bloom in the most unlikely places, and built a life that neither of them had dared to imagine possible. Together, they sat, holding hands, their hearts full of peace and contentment, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.